Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell, and today's topic is 10 Years and 30 Hills, Protecting Sumatra's Tigers, Orangutans, and More, presented by WWF team members Jan Vertefeuille and Annika Terrana. Thank you so much for being here today, Jan and Annika. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Brooke, and hi everyone out there. I want to give a special shout out to my parents who are tuning in from Canada for this. So I'm Jan Vertefeuille. I'm a senior advisor with World Wildlife Fund. And so my colleague Annika and I are going to share one of our very favorite projects with you today. So we're really excited this summer, as Brooke mentioned, to be celebrating the 10th anniversary of this project to protect the 30 Hills landscape. And this is in Sumatra, Indonesia. And our approach here is something that has rarely been tried by conservation groups. And it was risky, it was crazy ambitious, and one decade in, it's paying off. But first, I want to give a bit about WWF. We are the world's largest conservation organization. We're on the ground in nearly 100 countries, and we've been around since 1961. We started out with a singular focus. It was to ensure the survival of endangered species in the wild. And over the past 60 plus years, we've grown to focus on 6 areas to protect nature and the planet. These are the priorities that WWF focuses on across the globe, because we realize you can't conserve species without protecting the places they live, the forests, the fresh water, the oceans. And you can't protect those places without working with people on the threats that are facing them. We've come to see that people must be at the heart of everything we do. Communities need to benefit from conservation for the work to have a lasting impact. So of those 6 teams, I work on the wildlife team and Annika works on the forest team. And you may think that everyone at a conservation organization is a scientist, but my background was journalism and communications. And I've been using those skills at WWF to focus on advocacy and campaigns to try to push for conservation wins on the global level. And I've been with WWF for more than 20 years, and I have led a number of really exciting international campaigns, but this project in Sumatra is my all-time favorite. So where is this exactly? So Sumatra is an island, the 6th largest in Southeast Asia. It is really beautiful and a really challenging place to work. So it's one of the most biodiverse regions on the planet. It's also a global deforestation hotspot. And biodiversity just means the variety of plants and animal life in an area. And because Sumatra is along the equator, there are tropical forests here that hold an incredible amount of life. And one of the many challenges of conservation here is that Indonesia is a poor country, and one of their biggest assets is their vast forest land. So here the government owns most of the forest, and they divide it up into concessions. These are blocks of forest that they license out, usually to commercial companies. And they're really hesitant to give up the revenue source of those concessions, because they can bring in money from logging and agriculture and clearing forests for rubber and palm oil and pulp that's often used in sold to Western countries. So even setting aside as a national park can be a challenge. And deforestation here is something of a way of life for many farmers who use what's called slash and burn land clearing to clear the rainforest and grow their crops. So let's zoom into the landscape we're going to talk about today. It's in the middle of this island of Sumatra. It's called Bukit Tigapulu, but we're going to call it by its English name for the purposes of this discussion, and it's 30 Hills. And 30 Hills, even though it's, as its name implies, a very hilly landscape, it has something that there isn't much left of in Sumatra, and that is flat lowland rainforest. And it's this flat land that's the most highly coveted for agriculture, for farmers, for palm oil companies, for pulp and paper companies, rubber companies. So there's a lot of pressures on the landscape. And it's also a favorite habitat for Sumatran elephants, who tend to avoid hilly terrain. So the competition for these lowland forests can be fierce. And sadly, it's rarely the wildlife that wins these battles. So if you look on this map, the light green blocks that are listed as block 1 and block 2, they're not connected, but they serve as a really important buffer zone for that big national park there, which is mostly hills. And so it's in those two light green blocks that have most of that lowland forest. So about 15 years ago, the government of Indonesia was set to license these two blocks to a paper company. And this is about 100,000 acres. And the paper company planned to clear cut it and turn it into a pulp plantation. So all of the people, all of the wildlife, the forest, the biodiversity would have been affected by this. And so WWF and partners realized the only way we could really save the forest here was to create our own forestry company and compete against that paper company for a license. So we applied for a license to manage the forest, and we secured a 60-year license. So we now manage those two blocks of forest. And this is largely untested undertaking by conservation groups. Conservation groups don't normally start companies. But there's no doubt the forest and the wildlife there would be gone by now if we hadn't taken this route. Okay, so one of the amazing things about this area is it's one of the last places on the planet where elephants, tigers, and orangutans still coexist. All of these species are critically endangered. They're really running out of habitat very quickly due to deforestation. And there's a whole range of other fascinating species here that we'll get into in a bit. And so for all of these species, it means that any remaining forest, like 30 Hills, takes on more importance for them. So what WWF and partners did was create a commercial forestry company, as I mentioned, but we weren't going to just use it to protect the forest like conservationists normally try to do. This company would also create ways to generate revenue and help the local people find a path away from that kind of deforestation. And the company we created is called ABT. So many communities in this area, they have limited options and they're just trying to survive and support their families. So we really need to offer alternatives to clearing the forest, ways that they can improve their quality of life and provide decent income without deforestation. So ABT inherited a landscape that was already pockmarked with a lot of illegally deforested land. And in the last 10 years, the team has managed to get the annual deforestation rate down an astonishing 90%. And they do that through heavy community engagement and a lot of forest patrolling. They also now have more than 5,000 acres of it under restoration, so replanting trees or just protecting it and letting the forest regenerate on its own. By no means are all the challenges gone. The illegal deforestation will never go away in Indonesia, quite frankly, but ABT serves as a model for what is possible. So what does the ABT company do exactly? So from day one, ABT has made collaboration with the Indigenous and local communities a cornerstone of its work. It's really a dire situation for the Indigenous tribes of Central Sumatra. They're trying to hold on to their forest-dependent way of life as the forests disappear around them. So ABT focuses on generating revenue that benefits our local community partners. It employs local people. It has started women's cooperatives, farmer groups, a sustainable rubber enterprise. And if you look closely at this tree over here on the right, this is one of the traditional honey harvesters from the Talang Mamek tribe. And he is free climbing a tree that's easily 100 feet tall to collect the honeycomb. And I think that the 4 women's cooperatives that we have started are something I'm particularly proud of. So these groups are self-governing, and each one decides what they want to focus on to generate income and improve their quality of life. Some are raising livestock to sell to their community members. Some have created a commercial composting business to improve crop yields. Some have a community garden to address food insecurity, and then they have a mini store where they sell the vegetables to their neighbors. And for many of these women, it's the first time they've ever earned their own income. So, there is an indigenous tribe of hunter-gatherers. They're called the Talang Mamek, and they have a village inside the boundaries of the ABT concession. And ABT pays for a second teacher at the village school. They provide school meals and scholarships for students who want to be able to go beyond just the elementary school. And it's a way of providing educational support for this community that is very sort of limited income and quite marginalized. So in addition to the community work that we do here and the forest protection, it's important to monitor and protect the other inhabitants, and that's the wildlife. And to really understand what species are here and what parts of a forest they are using, we put motion detected cameras along paths that wildlife are likely to use. Because when you have dense forest, it's really hard to know where the wildlife is and what parts they're using. And if we want to be able to deploy like forest patrols in an area where there's, most of the, say, elephants or most of the tigers, we really need to have the best data about what parts of the forest they're using. So the past 5 years, WWF has been conducting research in different areas of the 30 Hills concession. And so I'm going to show you some of the 35 species we've caught on camera. And this one right here is a sun bear. And this is a pigtail macaque. And it's interesting because the animals can often hear the camera clicking, and the curious ones will come over and we'll get these quite close-up selfies of them. We also sometimes lose cameras to elephants and bears and other wildlife who actually will take a swipe at them and knock them off the trails. So you never know what kind of photos you're going to get when you come back to check the camera traps. But this is a macaque, just checking it out. Unfortunately, he did not damage the camera. And this odd-looking creature is called a tapir. They're endangered, and they're actually most closely related to horses and rhinos. So they are making use of the forest. They're normally nocturnal, but this one was clearly taking a stroll during the daylight. So we got a good photo of her. And this is a bearded pig, which doesn't sound like such an exotic species, but we are really happy when we see pigs and deer on these camera traps because they are prey species that tigers need to survive. So if you can see a healthy population of the prey species, then you know that there's good conditions for the tigers. And this one we were really excited to find on camera. This is a wild dog species called a dhole. They're also endangered, and they need really good intact forest to survive. We had no idea they were even in this area until we started seeing photos of them pop up on the cameras. So that's a really good sign that this forest can support wild dogs. And they love to lay around and kind of roll around like your pet dog would do in the forest. So we've gotten lots of good photos of these guys. Now this is a clouded leopard. It's one of 9 wild cat species that we have in Sumatra. And so we've seen a number of them here. They are second in size only to the Sumatran tiger here. And this is a tiger, so kind of the king of the jungle here. We have found that this has really good sort of tiger density, meaning that the population here is quite robust for the size of the forest. And so far, we've been able to identify 12 of them individually. And the way you identify tigers is their stripe pattern is unique. It's like a human fingerprint. And so if you can get enough photos of the tigers, you can start to identify individuals. And if you can see above this cub here, that is a camera trap. And what we do is we put camera traps up on each side of the path. So you're getting a photo of the animals on both sides. And that's how you can really get the best sort of visual of what the animals are and get good photos of them. So far, we've found 12, and we have not completed a complete research of the entire concession because 100,000 acres is a big area to cover. And then elephants, my personal favorite. There are probably 120 to 150 Sumatran elephants in this area, and it may be one of the last viable populations because they need such room to roam. And so this is critically important habitat for them. And as like I said, they prefer the flat lowlands. And unfortunately, the national park, which is protected, is almost entirely hills. So they're down here below the national park. But we've got a thriving population at the moment. And this is probably one of our most amazing stories out of 30 Hills. We have incredible partners in this effort. WWF is not doing this alone. We work with the Frankfurt Zoological Society and the Orangutan Project. And with so little intact forest remaining across Sumatra, those two partners have used the concession to establish a brand new population of Sumatran orangutans. And as I mentioned, they're critically endangered. So to date, our partners have released more than 200 orangutans. And almost all of these orangutans have been rescued from the illegal pet trade. And really sadly, they're usually captured when they're tiny infants because they're very cute and easy to take care of at that point. And the mothers are almost always killed because they will not give up their babies. They fight to the death. So these infants don't have the skills to survive in the wild. So the Frankfurt Zoological Society puts them through what they call jungle school, and it can last several years. But they teach them how to find food, how to make a nest at night to survive, and when they deem them ready, they release them into our concession. And each orangutan has an accompanying forest patrol that's with them every single day until Frankfurt decides that, okay, they're thriving, they're doing okay, we're going to be able to leave them alone. And so it's a very robust process to make sure the orangutans are thriving. And to date, we've had 24 infants born in the concession to these released orangutans, and the population is doing really well here. So that's kind of a quick overview of this really special project on its 10th anniversary. And now I'm going to turn it over to Annika, who is just back from spending 6 months there and was able to really embed herself into the project and has some great stories. So over to you, Annika.
Thank you, Jan, and thanks everyone for being with us today. Like Jan said, I was incredibly privileged to spend 6 months in Indonesia. My initial focus was on forests and human health, working with the team to expand how ABT brings this very evidence-backed relationship into how they reduce economic pressure on forests. So for example, the less families have to pay for unexpected emergencies, the less they feel pressure to clear their land, sell their land, plant oil palm, and then in turn the fewer tangible health risks they face from a degraded environment. But just as important, prioritizing local solutions for health, I quickly found, goes hand in hand with rebuilding trust with communities that have been historically let down by many other actors who might have been where this concession now stands and where ABT is managing this forest. But first, next slide, please. Thank you, Jan. Jan's helping me drive here. But first, okay, so why was I there talking about health to begin with? So we know that addressing climate change without forests is not possible. We know that addressing the biodiversity crisis without forests is not possible. We also know that addressing human health without forests is not possible. And we know that in really specific, tangible ways. So WWF has a forest and health initiative, which I lead. And we have a framework within that initiative that really serves to provide anyone with a way to understand how our health can be influenced by forests, taking a view of human health as both a very global but also very personal, visceral issue. And importantly, providing a balanced analysis really of the role of forests in human health, recognizing that they can negatively impact our health, say like if a tree falls during a storm, but on the whole, protected, well-managed, and restored forests can overwhelmingly contribute to human health and well-being in really, really important ways that we've wanted to expand in the conservation work that we do. So if we go to the next slide, please. I'll just really quickly want to share that our initiative has dug into the 5 categories of human health that you see on the screen: non-communicable disease, environmental exposure, pollution, food and nutrition, physical hazards, and infectious disease. And elements of all of these were present in 30 Hills with the Talamama community living inside the concession, but also community members living around the otherwise very fragmented landscape. And I'm just going to highlight one of the examples and then bring it back to 30 Hills. So if we go to the next slide, please. The role of forests in physical hazards like storms, flooding, drought, landslides, wildfires, and extreme temperatures is quite present. So we know that forests do play a protective role in human health up to a point. They buffer the impacts of things like floods, though that doesn't mean they can prevent all floods. They help prevent landslides, but if there is a landslide, it doesn't necessarily mean it's directly related to the forest that was there. And then lastly, well-managed forests do help prevent wildfires, but it doesn't mean you're not going to have any fire. Now, all that said, interestingly, forests do and can significantly protect against impacts of extreme heat. So if we go to the next slide, here's an example here. In the last 40 years, the number of extreme heat events, particularly in cities, but elsewhere as well, has increased by over 200%, affecting billions of people, over a fifth of the planet's population. In both rural areas and cities, forests help mitigate the impacts of extreme heat. And that's really important to places like Indonesia, where you have huge urban centers, but also you have a lot of people who are working in these fragmented landscapes for their livelihoods. So heat and its effects have all sorts of compounding issues on human health, and the role of these impacts can also have pretty dramatic impacts on how susceptible a person or community is to disease, including infectious disease. If you've participated in some past daily doses with WWF presenting, you might have heard us talk about the role of zoonoses and infectious diseases globally. 3 in every 4 new diseases are zoonotic, meaning they spill over from wildlife to people. And the majority of those known zoonoses are caused in part by some element of deforestation. And then within those numbers, many of the known new viruses are found in Southeast Asia. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to bring it back to us for 30 Hills, where again, these factors were present in different ways within 30 Hills. So day-to-day impacts on people's well-being from heat, haze, and otherwise, coupled with that long history of really being disappointed at times, let down by other outside actors who perhaps made a lot of promises in past, is really why I spent the majority of my time meeting people quite literally where they were and where they are. Often right here, what you see on the screen, literally here in their community meeting center, or in the village shop from where I'm taking the photo, and also with people taking midday breaks from their farming. So with our partner, Health and Harmony, ABT adopted an approach called radical listening that relies on community solutions and accountability to protecting the surrounding forests, really recognizing community members as the experts and protagonists, of course, in their environment, in an area where you've had a lot of companies come in and take over parts of the land. So everybody needs livelihoods, yes, of course, just as you and I do. But what interestingly came up just as often, if not more often in some cases, was really the health and education of people's families and consistency from partners like ABT. Which is why, if it has been such a strength, that ABT is here for the long term. So if we go to the next slide, please, I have a photo here of Herni, who you'll see on your screen in a minute, is the most trusted and consistent person in ABT for community members. She regularly coordinates with government health facilities to bring health access to the villages. And now she also helps to monitor health outcomes against a baseline for community health, which was not something previously considered a direct part of ABT's conservation work. It was there. ABT has always provided services where possible to family members, but really saw it as, oh, of course, it's something we need to have available for community members, but it wasn't an integral part of the conservation approach, which over time has become the case. And that, along with ABT's longstanding presence, has helped provide free treatment and preventative care to more than 1,200 community members with limited access to that healthcare, and support the education of over 50 students from the Talamama community. So if we go to the next slide, this is probably the most possibly accurate depiction of a day in my life, which is standing in front of this road or smaller roads and figuring out how to navigate during the rain season, which was predominantly when I was there. So like most conservation, the most consistent need is adaptability. And after I arrived, it became quickly apparent that the most pressing health challenge wasn't necessarily about a specific health issue, although there are certainly many. It was really about the continuity of healthcare. And this inaccessible road leading up to and through part of the concession that ABT manages, and then lastly, erosion of trust with the village inside the concession as they struggled to enact some of ABT's programs while tending to their more serious health needs. Those were the biggest front and center challenges that ABT was approaching during my time there. And so we adapted, and I adapted with the team, and now ABT is actively planning for solutions to improve this road that community members, have really hammered home in a way that can meet their needs while avoiding encroachment from outside parties, as is almost always a risk from new roads. So as ABT passes its 10-year mark, stemming the forces that would have inevitably overtaken this remaining forest, they are looking to the future and restoring trust with community members and really redefining that local partnership in a way that recenters their continuity of care, healthcare with those services, but also what does it mean to ensure health and well-being together, for example, looking at this road and improving conditions as part of the programs that IBT provides. And so if we go to the next slide, I do want to bring it back to what we can do to play our part to support the biodiverse forest and wildlife of Indonesia. Don't want to leave you with all this information without the connection back to us here at home. In addition to showing interest and financial support, when possible, being engaged as a consumer has a daily impact. My background at WWF is in fact working with companies, and increasingly so health companies, but companies across the board that use forest products. The majority of the world's palm oil, much of its pulp and paper, comes from Indonesia. There actually was just recently an article about the RV industry, which exploded during the pandemic, and a lot of the demand for the wood used in RVs is directly connected to forests in Indonesia. And by being conscientious of what we consume, we're directly influencing that demand and production of the companies that often manage these lands. So it's a really important part that we can play. And lastly, by letting our representatives know how much we value forests and wildlife and bring it back to our own health and well-being. I mentioned extreme heat. That's something also really relevant for all of us. It's a clear component of what we can advocate for in our own cities. A certain threshold, 40% threshold actually of tree canopy in and around cities, can directly reduce extreme heat risks and increase that sort of attention and value to the role that forests can play and help sustain more broadly the world's remaining biodiversity together. And I have one more slide for us before we wrap it up. I was so thrilled to be able to spend that time in Indonesia. As I bring this deep in understanding of 30 Hills and those relationships back to my work in the US with me, the team in 30 Hills is gearing up for another planting season right about now and restoring habitat for this baby elephant, which was also caught on one of those ABT camera traps. And they're doing so with communities that ABT is partnered with for the decades ahead. So thank you so very much for being with us today. I'm going to turn it back over to Brooke to help us transition to questions, but first with a new video we have with WWF Indonesia.
Yes, thank you, Annika and Jan, so much. That was so informative. And I do have one quick question before I play this video. I think it's the perfect time to ask, what are you both most excited for next? What is the next phase of this project? Or if you're looking to the next 10 years, the next decade, what are you working on? What are you excited for?
Well, for me, so I'm from the wildlife team, I would say that really deepening our understanding of, with more camera trapping research to really fully map out this entire concession. And 100,000 acres it's double the size of Washington, D.C., if that gives you a sense. So it's a really big geographic range. So we have not touched all of the forest yet with camera traps. So we really want to map out all the wildlife and then start defining like what are the highest priorities for elephants and tigers. And that's going to take a few more years. So, but I'm really excited about this. Will help us work with the government and work with local officials and local farmers about like really coming up with a plan to ensure the long-term survival of these guys. And as we mentioned, we have a 60-year license, so we got 50 more years to go on this. So that's my excitement, and I'll turn over to Annika.
Yeah, I mean, to be there and see all the signs of wildlife is so encouraging and really just much needed doses of hope and optimism for how wildlife are still adapting. And then looking ahead, so ABT is 10 years of experience under their belt, and I really emphasize the relationship with community members because that's what I saw when I was there every single day was the relationships being built together with community members in and outside of the concession. And so what I'm most excited for is building that even further, deepening that, and finding ways to support those community members to maintain the forests. And I think the attention to health and well-being, although climate change has increased negative impacts, it also has raised the attention of the role that forests and wildlife play in helping and supporting people against those factors of flooding and extreme heat and things like that that can come with climate change. So there's more support and attention from government, from other stakeholders to support community members in having a healthy environment. So I'm optimistic about that.
Ah, so much to be excited for. Ah, so exciting. I mean, I'm all excited, and I can only imagine you do this every single day as you're seeing this progress along. 50 more years, that's a long time to get a lot more done. Well, I'm going to go ahead and play this video, everyone. It's about 2 minutes long. And while I'm playing that, think of your questions and put them in your GoToWebinar control panel there. We've already have some really good ones coming in, but please don't hesitate. If you have a question, put them in there and we will get to them as soon as we're done with this video. So let's go ahead and get this on up. What a beautiful way to end the presentation. Oh, that was so gorgeous and so inspiring and heart uplifting. All right, everyone. We have some time for questions here, and we have a lot of really good ones coming in. So until we'll see how many we can get through until the top of the hour, and we will go from here. But all right, and also Jan and Annika, if I ask anything that you don't know, that's a-okay. Just say next question. We will continue on. We have a very diverse set of questions coming in. So first one, and this is a great question. Are there any signs of the palm oil industry slowing down in Indonesia?
You want to take that one, Annika? Or?
Sure. So slowing down, no. That said, there is a lot of collective effort from really key stakeholders across the world, including WWF Indonesia, working with government to try to instill better policies that ensure the protected areas remain protected, and then working with companies in particular to ensure that they're not driving additional deforestation. Demand is still really high, and the current government of Indonesia is not necessarily interested in overall slowing down. And so right now, a lot of the focus is on, from a demand side, ensuring sustainable certified palm oil um, is the norm. And then working with demand side countries like the US, but also the EU, to ensure that there are strong policies that don't incentivize deforested supply from deforested areas. That's really where we're seeing the most promise, so that the existing oil palm production can be done more sustainably, incorporate restored corridors, things of that nature. Um, that's really where we see the most promise. Overall demand not slowing down, I would say. Anything to add, Jan?
No, I'd just say that I think, the perspective from the Indonesian government is that a lot of families have been lifted out of poverty by growing palm oil. And there's nothing inherently bad about palm oil other than the health risks of the fat in it. But it's the fact that so much of it is grown by clearing tropical forests first. So if it's not on deforested land, it's not necessarily a concern. So that's just sort of the tricky thing about palm oil. But yeah, the global demand for palm oil is not, is massive. So,
Mm-hmm.
but great question.
Yeah.
And to elaborate on that a little bit further so that we can be aware consumers, could you elaborate on what certified sustainable palm oil actually means? Like when we see that label on something, what went into making sure that that label is accurate and that we know we're doing what we're supposed to as consumers?
Yeah, so I mean, certainly it's still tricky as consumers, and the onus should not be actually on only consumers, it's really on the companies. But that's why we want companies to know that as consumers, we care. Certified palm, um, it refers to a set of standards and principles and practices that ensure they're meeting at minimum a certain threshold for management. So for RSPO Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil, which WWF considers to be the best currently standard that's out there, that has a set of criteria that companies have to meet around ensuring that you're not adding to new deforested areas, so no palm on newly deforested areas. You're managing pesticide use, so they're not toxic pesticides. You're you're maintaining and ensuring that there's positive labor rights are respected, etc., and that there are really core biodiversity content also included. So no converting around, or rather the opposite, restoring around riparian zones. So restoring wherever there's waterways, which can have a disproportionately positive impact on restoring soil health, reducing erosion, and then protecting wildlife corridors, and basically expanding those those corridors along and within concessions, those are just some examples. If there are signs of orangutan, for example, so like we know a lot of this is in Indonesia, same in Malaysia, where this is native habitat range for orangutan, then not clearing areas where you know orangutan can come through. They have specific species requirements. So ensuring that those species requirements are to a degree accommodated. Things of that nature.
Great. Thank you so much for that explanation. I know I've always wanted to ask an expert that. So the more we know, the more smart decisions we can make as consumers. So thank you for that. This is also a really good question. How is the wildlife protected in the area? Are there rangers patrolling the areas to deter poachers, or is that still an issue that the local communities are having to deal with?
Yeah, so ABT has a very robust set of like basically their own rangers that do forest patrols, and they are out there looking for illegal activity, often deforestation, but they're also looking for poaching. And deforestation is probably the biggest pressure on the forest here and on the wildlife, but there is certainly poaching there. And so they're also looking for that and collecting if there are snares or they're finding, occasionally we'll see poachers on our camera traps. So that's sometimes a helpful way to, it's sort of like your Ring camera at home, but it's in the forest. So there is definitely poaching. There are patrols out there. And then, like I said, the Frankfurt Zoological Society has also an additional patrol team for their orangutans as well. And a lot of what they also do is work with the local communities about it. If orangutans come into your local, your backyard garden and they are, helping themselves to your fruit, how to address that sort of like human wildlife conflict and come up with solutions that work to maybe help people better protect their crops. And so that will reduce sort of the I guess, revenge on some of the wildlife who might just be out. Elephants do this too. They'll come in and they'll raid crops, and they're very destructive eaters. They trample everything in their path and knock a lot of things down. So it's also working with people about how do you protect your crops and yourself from the wildlife to prevent those kind of killings as well. But yes, we have rangers, and then obviously there is of course like government rangers as well that we can call in when we need. We don't have law enforcement powers, so we can call in so the government rangers if there's an issue as well.
Fantastic. Thanks for that explanation. We do have lots of wildlife questions, so we'll just stay on this theme for a little while longer. Could you talk a little bit more about the tiger population? It sounded like you had 12 individuals already identified, which is awesome. How viable is the population? Is it genetically diverse enough to sustain itself, or what is the scientist seeing?
That's a great question. Yes, so far it is, because one good thing about tigers is that they don't mind the hilly terrain, so they are also making use of that much larger national park next to us. And so there's a lot of, when young male tigers have to disperse and go find their own home range, they'll be crossing through the concession and through the national park. And so it's really critical to keep these wildlife corridors connected between, our concessions, and then there's a rubber plantation next door, and they've set aside some of their plantation for a wildlife corridor because these animals need room to roam and just disperse and find genetic diversity. So right now, the Sumatran tiger population is about 300 for the whole island. It's really small. So keeping those links and those corridors are critical. And so the next phase of our research is going to be how many of the tigers that we've seen are showing up year after year and are actually, this is their home versus they're moving through, in search of mates or habitat elsewhere. And so we can't say that we have all the answers yet on that, but the fact that they are using it is really valuable information. And tigers are pretty wily, I would say. They can make themselves scarce and live in a variety of even sometimes palm oil plantations, which elephants can't do as well. So that gives us hope for the tigers. And they breed like a domestic cat, right? They have large litters, and so that there's hope for the tigers there if we can just keep the habitat intact and protect them from the poaching.
Well, that's great to hear. We definitely need our predators on the land, that's for sure. Next, I mean, it was so exciting to hear about the orangutans that have been released into the area. Could you talk about orangutans overall? What is the overall population trend for Sumatra orangutans?
It's declining really rapidly because of deforestation, and orangutans cannot live without trees. They spend almost their entire life up in the tree canopy. So they have to have intact forests, and they have to have fruiting trees that they can eat from, and they have to be near rivers, um, and so they're really suffering because of all the deforestation across all of Sumatra. So that's why this brand new population that Frankfurt and the Orangutan Project have established is such a bright light, and that they are so well protected between us and their rangers, and the having this intact forest is one, again, it's like one of those sort of small glimmers of hope for the population. But I think there are now between 7,000 and 8,000 Sumatran orangutans in the wild, and the numbers are declining quite rapidly.
Wow, so yeah, it just goes to show how important these reintroductions are. So that is very good news, that piece of information you shared. This is also a fun one too. Speaking of endangered species, are there any Sumatran rhinos in the concession or any signs of them?
No, so the Sumatran rhinos are mostly in the south, in a different park, so there are no rhinos there. I know we would love to have rhinos there, but they're pretty far away, and I don't think they could ever make their way up there because of that there's just not the intact habitat anymore. And I don't think there were ever, I'm not positive about this, but I don't think there even historically have ever been rhinos there. So it's just not a place for them. So they're in different parts of the island. And there's also confusingly a few Sumatran rhinos in Borneo on a different island. So
Ah, okay. Yeah, I didn't know that on Borneo. That's crazy.
yeah, just
Sumatra
a few
rhinos on
left. But
Borneo. I had no idea.
yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, next. This is a great question. Could you talk a little bit more about the government's opinion on the concession and the progress it's making and seeing how successful it's been so far? Have you had any direct contact with like government officials or anything?
We have, and I think maybe Annika even, I don't know if she attended any of the meetings with them, but it's a very close relationship with the local forestry department, and it's a good, strong relationship with them. I think that we got the concession, this sort of unusual concession to conserve the forest instead of cut it down because there has been such enormous international and diplomatic pressure on Indonesia over the years. Um, to do more to save their forests because they are globally significant for climate mitigation and all kinds of things. So the government had to sort of show that it was doing some efforts in allowing some different approaches to conserving the forest, which is one of the reasons you've got this kind of concession. But the new president who came into office in November, he is much more conservation minded, and in fact, apparently elephants are his favorite species, and he's already got a collaboration with WWF Indonesia on elephants in Sumatra. And so I don't know if Annika, you had any interactions with government folks when you were there to talk about at the local level too.
Yeah, I did participate in a number of meetings with local government, and yes, very positive relationship, and one of coordination. So even where there weren't necessarily the big meetings, the team would have um, lunches or include government representatives, local government representatives on the forestry side, Ministry of Forests, to come and participate in some of the meetings and lunches and events with community members. And that's really important, both to building the relationship with local government, but also because community members did want to see that. So ABT manages the concession, is the collaboration partner, but at the end of the day, the authority still comes from um, the local representatives for the forestry departments. So that was really important to have their inclusion and to continually keep that line of communication open, which was quite positive. And that really sustained and allowed ABT to be effective when things might change at a national level. The prior minister, not the current, but the prior minister for forest was not particularly enthusiastic about um, about nature and was very sensitive to criticism, and as a result didn't like sort of public discussions that you might see even from just generic WWF reports on the rates of deforestation in Indonesia. So while that was happening at a national level, the local relationships were still quite strong. And so ABT's been able to maintain a very collaborative, positive relationship.
Oh, that's fantastic. And his favorite species are elephants? Wow. I mean, this could be a turning point. Wow, that's very exciting. When you have, government leadership, more conservation minded, some really cool things can happen. So you'll have to come back and give us some updates maybe in a year. The last question I will ask today, and I love this question since we love traveling, all of us at NatHab. Is there any ecotourism happening in 30 Hills? And if not, is that a potential development for local communities for more income for the area?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we actually have a conservation travel program that's exploring this for different locations. And 30 Hills is one that we're discussing. It's a challenge because if you remember Annika's photo of the road situation, it is muddy a lot and bumpy. And there's a real drawback to roads in conservation areas because if you build a really good road, it just allows easier access for like poachers and illegal loggers. So it's a balancing act about roads, for instance, and you've got to have roads, right, if you're going to have ecotourism. So the team is talking about it, and maybe it would be very sort of small scale, high end, like, serious birders. But I don't know if Annika wants to talk about the accommodations that we have so far that might dissuade high-end tourism, or maybe not. You want to share?
Sure. I mean, totally depends on what you're up for. So the accommodations at base camp, which is where I stayed within block 1, are rustic. I mean, they were luxury for a forester or for someone who's used to working out deep in forests or in nature, in the field. Um, that said, for sort of a sustained ecotourism market, they would have to certainly they would have to revise and rebuild some of their renovate. They would have to renovate some of the facilities, probably if only for consistency. But some people are really interested. I mean, this group might have a unique perspective on like what the range of um, facilities and appeal is sometimes to having the more rustic experience. I will tell you, the staff would probably love the excuse to have an upgrade on some of the facilities. But as always, it kind of comes down to budget. And it's a little chicken and egg on getting the investment to do those upgrades and then attract additional traffic. But one thing is they have an on-site chef, and the food is really, really good. So I would say that's a big draw, and like has no work needed on that side. But the sleeping arrangements, and then like Jan said, the road, that's the hardest part of any tourism outfit generally, is getting that infrastructure in a functional place and in a place that then is usable and able to be maintained, for example, in low seasons as well. That would be the journey to go on.
Yeah, that's another update you'll have to come back on and tell us if there is any development or just going to keep it as is. So, yeah, it's a big decision to make either way to renovate all that stuff and market it. Yeah, it's such a big thing. Well, that is the last question that we will take today. So, Annika and Jan, do you have any last closing comments that you would like to share with everyone?
I think we're just delighted to be here and have the interest. And I think both of us could talk about this project forever. It's just it's just such an exciting one, and it's a new way of working for us. And yeah, we'd love to come back and maybe not wait 10 years, but give you an update later on if you would have us. But thank you so much to NatHab too for being such a great partner.
Couldn't say it better myself.
Hey, you bet. I scheduled these things, so you let me know when you have an update. And I will get you two back on. I am the keeper of the calendar. So it was great. Well, thank you both so much, Annika and Jan, for the wonderful presentation. And I would like to thank everybody who tuned in. Join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nethab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.